All right, let's move on to disputes. Lot disputes.
Yeah.
Do you see that often, and what happens there? Because I know we talked about an issue with that, and I can't remember the name of the registries. Can you just touch on that?
Yeah. So if there is a significant title issue with a property, one of our first red flags, if it's known, obviously, because if it's unknown, that's different. But if it's a known title issue, one of the first red flags that lawyers see is when we do our title search, the property has been retained in the registry system. So that was the paper-based system of registering and transferring ownership of properties in Ontario. So that has moved. The vast majority of properties have moved to the new system, which is all digital. So every record is digital now. You don't need to hold on to your papers or anything like that. So that is the title system that we operate in now. So if we do a title search of the property, and it has a little R beside the PIN number, we know that it's still in registry. And the first question any lawyer should ask if they see one of those is, why is it still in registry? Because usually it means that something is wrong in the history of that property. It wasn't in good enough shape to convert it to the new title system. So we can get a report from the province where they outline at least one of the reasons why it was retained. Because when all the properties were moved, I'm so glad I didn't have to do this or be part of this. But essentially what they did is the land registry office went through every single detail of the properties in registry and verified that past transfers, all of these things were correct and complete, and that the current owner really owned the property, and there was nothing about it that concerned them. Because when they move it into the new system, the province is essentially guaranteeing title to a point. So they have some liability for all the properties in this new system. But if they weren't satisfied that they were willing to take on that liability, they would leave it in the old system. So there's very few left. A lot of them are, rural properties, private roads tend to be a big contributor, things like that. But every once in a while, there's one in a municipality that has some issue. And some of the issues can be really benign. So for instance, on a transfer, someone's name was registered with a spelling, and then when they sold the house, there was a different spelling. And was it the same person? Yes, it was. But it's a quirk, and they don't necessarily, depending on who reviewed it, and they don't necessarily like the quirk because it should be consistent.
Right.
So it's the same person that owned it, that sold it. So some of them we look at and we're like, oh, okay, we can title insure over this because it's not really material. And then some of them you look at and you're like, oh, that's a real concern.
Got it. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of different things that could
it doesn't necessarily mean
it.
the property is not one you would buy. It just needs to be investigated.
Right. And then, so you get the title on it, but they may also put some exceptions in there as well, too, saying, hey, look, we will give you title insurance, but we're not covering this until it gets resolved after closing.
Yeah. So if we have a quirky property, we put in sort of a pre-approval for title insurance. Yep. And we say, here's the quirk, here's all the documents about the quirk so you can look at it. And sometimes they're like, we love this quirk, we don't care about it, we don't foresee any exposure, we'll title insure it so you can close like a normal deal. Right. And then sometimes they'll say, we're a little worried about it, so we'll offer this type of coverage, but not this type. And then you just have to decide if you're comfortable proceeding.
Yeah. Have you ever had to deal with anything like that before, Q?
No.
Okay.
Crazy issues like that.
Yeah. Well, we brought that up because there was something like one of our clients was looking to purchase something and it had this particular issue.
Okay.
Yeah, property's still in registry, so we always want to look into it.
And was it a rural property or?
No. It was like right in Toronto, heart of Toronto.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was just a matter of claim of the lot. One side, I think, said they had claim of it, and the other side had claim of it.
There was a problem with a neighboring property. So some properties don't really have a survey registered with the property, like a reference plan. Some of them have what's called a meets and bounds description, which is where they would define the property in words. So they would say, starting at a point, here, located by, geography, and walk this far, this many meters to the northwest, and then, this, and you do the little square or whatever the shape of the property is.
Yeah.
So on a neighboring property, I believe, I'm going from memory here, there was a transfer that described the property of the neighboring house that overlapped the subject property, very minor overlap. So it was like 4 feet or something at the back end. But because of that, it's not clear who owns that little portion. So the province was not willing to move either property into title, their new title system, until it got resolved.
Right. What about estate sales? What are some of the mistakes that you see there?
I think one of the challenges of estate sales is that people don't want to wait for probate.
Right. And probate can take up to...
Depending on where in the province you are, it can be quite lengthy. And as you'd expect, bigger municipalities like Toronto have a longer lead time on probate applications. Whereas, we've sent a probate application to Northern Ontario and got it back the next day. So it really just depends on how busy the subject court is. So when you're picking the court, it has to be the jurisdiction in which the person lived at the time of their death. So you have to apply to the correct court or it won't be granted. And it's just, the Toronto courts in every aspect have a backlog. Durham has a lead time that's much less than Toronto, whereas Toronto may be 6 months at some point, Durham maybe 3. So just as a ratio, that seems to be how it moves. But, some times of year there's less staff because there's holidays and things like that, and they can slow down or speed up.
Right. Who is it that doesn't want to wait? Is it those real estate agents who are looking to get paid? Those guys?
There is sometimes clients who will call and say, the realtor said we can list it. We just have to put in a clause.
So it is the realtor.
But not all the time. Sometimes, the executors don't want to be responsible for these houses for the long term either.
They want their money. They want to move on.
All the beneficiaries are calling them saying, when is this going to happen? Right. It's a high pressure environment sometimes, depending on the people involved. And they just don't want to have to be watching this house and looking out for it and making sure the insurance is paid and all these things. So there's a lot of really good motivators to get this done. But the risk is if you enter into a contract to sell the property and you don't get probate in time to close it, then the executor could have some personal liability there because they can't sign a transfer to register with the province until they have the court certificate of appointment. So it's a timing issue.
That's what the certificate of appointment. So that's what you really want to get before you list.
Yeah. So, sometimes there's confounding factors. Like there's a lender who is breathing down their neck, wanting to get paid, potentially threatening some sort of action. Sometimes they're trying to sell quickly in a good market or, something like that. So there are some scenarios where people may market the property with the notes that it is an estate property and they do not yet have probate. But what that means is they're going to want to put in conditions that give them a unilateral right to extend this closing. And that may turn off some buyers, especially those who are selling another home or occupying as a primary residence, because it's like, okay, your closing date is March 20th, maybe. But we can tell you, 10 days before that it's not March 20th, it's April 20th. And that's difficult. So it's sort of you don't really know what's better. Do you market it as we don't have probate yet and see who you get? Or do you wait till you have probate and hope to get more people because they won't be nervous about the closing date?
Right.
The big important thing is you don't want to end up in a situation where you have no further rights to extend. You're expected to close on a specific date and you don't have probate. Okay. Because then you're opening yourself up to a lot of potential liability as an individual.
Now, what if there's a couple that owns their home? Mm-hmm. One of them passes away. Do you still need to do the probate? Does it go into the estate of that?
It depends.
Okay.
I know people don't like that answer, but it depends when the couple bought the house, how they registered their ownership. So you have a choice when you buy a house with more than one owner. You can put ownership in joint tenancy, or you can put ownership in tenants in common. So, and you can do a combination, like 2 people can be a joint tenant. The third is a tenant in common. It's an estate planning tool. So there's some flexibility into how you set it up. But joint tenants have a right of survivorship between them. So if one joint tenant passes, the other becomes the owner by right of survivorship. There is no need for probate. You just have to do what's called a survivorship application to remove the name of the deceased.
But how do I know at the beginning?
Got to do a title search.
But nobody's ever asked me before. You know what I mean? So when I bought, I bought you're talking about primary residence, right?
Yeah. So the lawyer would ask you when you buy it, which one you want. So at that,
maybe they shouldn't pay attention. That's probably me, right?
Yeah,
Q?
and Darlene had it all taken care of.
Yeah, Q's looking at me and like, that's you, Gary.
The lawyer better be asking
Darlene knows,
you.
yes.
Yeah. And so you sign what's called a title direction that shows your name, your birth date, and how you're taking title as a group.
Okay.
So that gets registered with the province. So if you're selling a home for an older client, for instance, and they say, my spouse passed away 10 years ago. Now I want to sell the home. You would do a title search, just make sure they were joint tenants. And in that case, all you need is the death certificate. You can register a survivorship application at the time the house is sold. No problem. If there is nothing noted in capacity or tenants in common, then you have a problem and you need to move to probate before you sell the house.
Got it. Okay.
So I think, Gary, to break it down, we can have, let's say we did a joint venture. So you and Darlene joint tenants, maybe myself and Nadia joint tenants, but together it can be tenants in common.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. And then that person's name still needs to be on the purchase and sales agreement, and it would just be like, oh.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, it doesn't?
No.
Interesting.
Because they're at the moment of death, they were no longer an owner. It passed to the other person. So the fact that their name is still on there is more of an administrative cleanup than an actual right of ownership. So the person who is the joint tenant who survived would be the one who actually sells the house.
Got it. So you don't even need their name on there.
You don't even need their name because no one can sign for them. There's no probate. So I wouldn't even include it. I think it would just, potentially complicate. And then the lawyer will be like, why is this person on? And why aren't they signing anything? And where's their ID? And
Yeah, right. Okay.
So lawyers make everything so difficult.
What about outstanding permits? Do you come across that often where, the homeowner pulls some permits, they got to get some work done, but they never close it?
Yeah.
Do you even pick that up on closing, or sometimes it's found later on after that new homeowner purchases a property?
Yeah, it depends on, so whether or not a search is done. Okay, I'll give a bit of background. Sorry, I keep giving background. But the introduction of title insurance into the Ontario market changed a bit of the way that houses are bought and sold. So previous to that, there was a process called solicitor opinion on title, where you would have to order all of these off-title searches. So one of them would be like a building compliance report to see if there's open permits and all of these things. They're not ordered in single-family residential properties anymore because title insurance covers off those risks. So when you're already purchasing title insurance, which has a significant fee depending on the value of the house and the mortgage, it doesn't make sense to also pay a significant fee to order all the off-title searches unless there's something about the property that sort of necessitates them. Like a duplex or a multi-unit, you would always order them because title insurance doesn't offer the same coverage. There's something quirky in the listing that gives you a feeling that maybe there was recent renovation and I want to be safe. So there's times when they're ordered, but generally for residential resale, and it used to be prior to title insurance, you had to have a survey and you had to have all of these expensive things prior to, so you could do that solicitor opinion on title. But it's changed so much from that. So in a residential resale property, typically they're not ordered unless there's some reason specifically to order.
And you're ordering that on behalf of your clients?
Yes.
Or okay, so it's not me requesting it or Quentin. So you'd be like, okay, this is this type of property, we should order this.
Yeah, like if we see multi-residential things like that, we order a whole slew of searches. And it has a cost to the buyer, but they're required because we can't get title insurance endorsements for the same things we can in single-family residential.
Okay. What about liens on properties? What kind of crazy liens do you ever see? Like,
What people are most shocked by is the liens for rental items in their home.
yes.
Like their water heater and their water softener and their air conditioning and their furnace. They don't realize when they buy those things and sign those contracts that a lot of them have the right to register mostly what's called a notice of security interest. And it does make sense because they don't want the house to sell with something inside it that they own and nobody knows about it. And then they're knocking on the door trying to get it back or, whatever. So I see why they register. But a lot of people don't know that they register. So it becomes a bit funny when the new owners have agreed to assume it but it's registered. So you have to do this thing called a postponement. So everyone just has to know what to do. And then the other thing that trips people up. So let's say you got a whole package of things together, like you got air conditioning, a furnace, et cetera, and the new owner of the house agreed to assume the furnace. You should check with that company that they're going to break it out because some of them are like, no, you have to pay out the whole thing, even though the new owners have agreed to continue paying the rental fees.
Really?
Yeah. So I always say if someone's listing a house with rental items, call that company first and say, listen, I want to sell my house. I know I got a rental item. I'm hoping the new owner is going to take it over. anything I should know, anything that's going to be a problem, or I want to pay out just this, but not the other thing. Because sometimes, a lot of people are used to taking over the rental hot water heaters, but they might not want to take on a furnace. They'll expect the seller to pay that out in full. So you just want to make sure it's all going to work out the way you want.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, what about if I owe Quentin some money, and can he just slap a lien on my property?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So he would be an unsecured creditor. So unless there's something in the contract to get him security, or he gets a writ of enforcement, which is where he sues you and get a judgment and puts a writ
so
into
there
a
has to be a
region.
judgment.
Yeah. So unsecured creditors can't just decide they get security on your house. It's a whole process.
Okay, good. So I don't have to give him back the money.
I mean, yes, but it's not going to affect your house unless he sues you.
All right, awesome.